below them get fired.
Mm. Right. Okay, well, yeah, I just had to come over here and follow my sword right quick, let y'all know that I got integrity, man. Yeah, I got integrity, man. I'm not going. I'm not sipping the Kool-Aid, man. I'm not gonna do it. Yeah, so with that being said, let us do something, man. Like I said, man, this is gonna be very refreshing, man. I wanna go ahead and tap Tony's brain, man. I wanna go way back, man. I want him to tell me how he found me, what he thought when he found me, what he thought when he contacted me, and how he contacted. I want to go through the history, man. I'm going to put this out on the new channel so that everybody knows the history of Big Mike and Tony Maceo, man. So, Tony, I'm going to give you the floor, man, and you go ahead and give the history about just how you stumbled upon this great work that you call Mack City, man.
Well, there were back in the what late 90s,
Mm-hmm.
early 2000s. There was a revolution in adult entertainment.
Okay.
I'm not going to use the word corn. I'll use the word adult entertainment.
Okay.
And so what happened was there were a bunch of these niche genres in adult entertainment, amateur adult entertainment. There was the detestable and notoriously grimy foul.
Yeah.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
there was BV Finder and all these little sites that started popping up. There was a change in the adult industry.
Right.
And so I was, watching that. And at the time, I think in the late 90s, I was transitioning. I was going from undergrad in Virginia, and I was
Mm-hmm.
coming to, I had gotten into law school in Michigan. And so I moved to Michigan. And it was during this time, like anybody else, I had been, dating, you know, standard non-select dude, did okay with women, but never made out like gangbusters. I had a fascination with rats.
Uh-huh.
Um, had a little rat fetish, that type of situation. And the most attractive ones, could never really break ground with them. Could never really. It always seemed like I was an alien to them, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I was like, it was always the typical, as we said before. Oh, you so sweet, and all that used to chap my backside when I would hit. I couldn't stand that, but that's all they used to say. You so sweet. I hated that.
Yeah.
And so, but I could never make. I could make weight, but I could not satisfy. That rat itch, that rat fetish that I had. And so, when I moved to Michigan. I got into law school or whatever. And so I was coming. What happened was when I came across. I was in Flint at the time, and I came across. I kept, Flint was the rat capital.
Okay.
People think Detroit. Flint is the rat capital.
All right.
And so, like, oh, I'm in heaven. I'm up here with these rats, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna parlay with these rats. So, and it was the same thing, and I was in law school, and I was, doing an internship. And so it was like I could never relate, it was always something. And so I told this story. I went out on a date with, this little young ratchet. And so she just kept saying, you gonna break bread, you gonna break bread, you gonna break bread. And then she brought a friend along with her
Yeah.
because she was scared of going out by herself. So she brought a friend with her. She was like, you gonna break bread, you gonna break. And I'm not, I'm getting offended. How dare you ask me for money?
Right.
It's
Right.
like, well, she asked you for money because you're not a nigga that she would normally deal with. That's
Okay.
why you're outside of what she's attracted to. So I got a feeling, looking back then, I was a big time fool because what they were talking about, they weren't talking about hundreds of dollars, right?
Right.
They were talking about, just showing them a good time.
Mm-hmm.
They were talking about, go and get something to drink, go and get a bag of weed, go get something to eat, and just, get at the spot and turn. That's what they were talking about. And so me, Dudley Do Right, trying to be Mr. Clean, Mr. This, that, and the third. And so I really got offended. I dropped them off or whatever. And I couldn't understand. It's like, okay, well, I do okay with the girls that I'm somewhat attracted to.
Mm-hmm.
But the ones that I was really attracted to during my early stage, the ratchets that I was really attracted to during my early stage, I couldn't really break ground with them, you know. And so what happened was I was, in this amateur adult entertainment niche. I came across this website. It was called Mackcity.com.
Mm.
And it was I never will forget when I went to the site. It was 2004 was when I found the site.
Okay.
And in the first page says, I am the Fat Mack, and I will be your guide through these streets. And I was thoroughly intrigued by the character, the because you used early the animated version. What they're using today, you had a type of prehistoric version
Mm-hmm.
where you had already created a character, and you was like, I will be your guide through the streets, of Mack City. And I was like, is this nigga for real?
Right.
You know, and then the site was filled with all the ratchets, the type of ratchets that would turn my crank that I was
Right.
attracted to. It was just this circus, this cavalcade of rats. And I was sitting there, and they had names, and they had, I mean, they were characters. It was almost like similar to professional wrestling,
Yeah.
but this wasn't scripted. It was real.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was these pictures, and I'm like, okay, that these characters, Ice, V, Champagne,
Mm-hmm.
KBK, Crybaby Nish,
Mm.
and so these hooked on these characters. But then what was more intriguing was the journal logs.
Okay.
The journal logs told the story of the video. And
Mm-hmm.
I was just as entertained, if not more entertained by the journal logs as I was the video, the story, and the
Right.
character and the narrative, how you met them and the circumstances under which you met them and so forth. And then I was introduced to this peripheral character called the side trickster, and how he was the foil in the plot, and how all this stuff worked. And it's like, okay, I was thoroughly I mean, it was like the world's greatest nonfiction comic book was what it was.
Okay.
And it was going through, and I was reading the journal logs, and then the pictures and the videos were always under the story.
Yeah.
And so I was reading the stories, and I was thoroughly fascinated with the stories. And it was, I think the first one I saw, I think was Ice.
Mm-hmm.
There's Ice when she was dunking chicken at churches,
Okay.
and you was talking about how you met her, so forth and so on, and her story. Her story was a trip,
Okay.
and I'm like, okay, these rats are just like the ones that I just left.
Right.
And then it was like, and then not only was the journal logs there, but there was this type of advice column. It was like, it was a better version of what they call the pickup community, but it was deeper than that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, here was a guy sitting up here saying, he's like, look, if my fat pot belly midget penis self can make out with these rats, you
Right.
can too.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about, a self-help guide. I
Mm-hmm.
really dug in then. Well,
Okay.
then what happened was, concurrent with all this stuff on the site, there was also books. This
Mm-hmm.
this guy's talking about books. He's talking about, he's talking about these books. He's talking about, and he's read this book and read that book, and then he said, you know, I actually read Mein Kampf, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
here, this ninja is reading Hitler's autobiography. What in the
Mm.
hell is going on here?
Yeah.
And so he was talking about these books, and I said, "Well, that's up my alley, because I like to read
Mm.
books." big history buff, political politics and history and military history and things of that nature. And so I said, I was thoroughly fascinated because here was an adult site that had it was the thinking man's amateur adult entertainment. It wasn't
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
you know somebody that just wanted to eat a bag of Oreos and pleasure themselves. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't that wasn't what this was.
Yeah.
This was serious intellectual thought here. It wasn't just an amateur adult entertainment site. Whoever did this took some real time to do it, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And so also with that was these little stories about, this is how I did this. And I came up on this thing called goods and services. It was called gas, goods and services. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, doing all this with gas? What is this? He buying gas? Gas? These people's cars? What is this?
Right.
And so I read what the acronyms goods and services and explained what goods and services was. Rides, low budget cell phone assistance,
Mm-hmm.
uh, the equivalent of low level welfare. And
Mm-hmm.
then it hit me. When I read that, I went back to that date I was on. I was like, well, I be damned.
Mm.
I be damned. This is what he was talking about.
Yep.
You
Yep.
know, this is what he was talking about. Because all they wanted was a little weed and a little drink, and they were ready to get loose. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking I could have had one of the finest hours in my life.
Mm.
And I'm sitting up here, being arrogant, like, get over yourself. Because I was listening to another content creator that was sitting up here talking about suited and booted.
Nasheed.
And I'm like, okay, this suited and booted, they looking at me being suited and booted. They looking at me as food. They
Right.
looking at me as a mark. That don't mean nothing to them. Now, of
Mm.
course, some people are gonna say, "Well, yeah, what you expect? You messing around with rats. What you expect? That's rats." Well, that's who I was trying to get next to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going through that stage. And so that's who I'm rat wrestling. I'm rat wrangling. That I'm out here trying to trap a rat.
Mm.
And so, because they would talk, suited and booted in your mouthpiece. And I'm up here, sitting there thinking I'm spitting, some heavy stuff, and they smacking their lips and stuff when they looking at me, smacking their lips
Yeah.
and rolling their eyes, and then going on picking up their menu and ordering the house on me.
Mm.
And it's like, okay, well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. This suited and booted stuff ain't working for me.
Mm.
All this mouthpiece stuff ain't working for me because I'm sitting up here trying to talk about stuff that they don't give a damn about.
Yeah.
I'm sitting up here talking about stuff that they are not concerned about any of that stuff I'm talking. They are not concerned about politics or history or current events. They ain't interested in none of that. That's a waste of time.
For real.
So when I'm reading this stuff about goods and services, it clicked. It clicked.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm looking at this guy, this Negro up here in jeans. He's in sweats. I mean, he's obviously this guy has a degree of intelligence. Look at what he's talking about. Look at how he laid this out. So this guy's not a fool, but he's not sitting up here trying to be a mascot,
Right.
you know. And so I said, well, I made a mistake. I've been wrong, in my approach. And so I started reading. I became a junkie. Every time there was a new update, I would hit this look, waiting for the new updates. But I was also waiting for the updates on the journal logs.
Mm-hmm.
I was a journal log junkie,
Mm.
and I was like, uh, what new adventures? What new adventures am I going to be privy to this week? Is it going to be something that went down in Northland?
Right.
You know, is it gonna be something where this dude, it was like a real character, you know, and the pictures also told the story too. You would see them walking down the street in the projects, and I was like, damn, this is real, right?
Yeah.
And so I remember what it was. It was the story of how Champagne almost got killed.
Right. Right.
And I was like, wow. He was like, look, I was about to send her to hell. And then there was the
Ooh
picture of
wee.
SWAT teams. You had pictures of the SWAT teams up there jumping
Mm-hmm.
out the van and so forth. And then I think the final one was the one with Allie, you know. And you said, I got to be careful with her because, she carjacked police officers.
Mm.
And wow. Then when I actually went and looked, she had a real case for kidnapping her own son.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yo, these broads are mad shiesty. This nigga's navigating around some shiesty broads, man. And
Mm.
so for then, there was also a message board that we
Yeah.
could go and, offer feedback on the message boards.
Yeah.
So I went and I put the thing on the message boards. And then there was also, there was a subplot. The subplot was, okay, uh, I have to stay ahead of these rats. I got to stay 4 steps ahead of these rats. But there's a foil. There's this dude called the side trickster.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a foil in the plot because he's sabotaging the efforts of the protagonist.
Yeah.
He's sabotaging. He's actually going behind the guy's back and tricking with the rats and breaking the rule. As all this
Ooh.
is going down, he's going behind his back and doing this stuff. You
Mm,
know,
mm, mm.
and I'm like, okay, he's messing this up.
Yeah, man.
He's messing this up. And then as he's doing this, he's also tasked with the responsibility of getting footage on his own.
Mm-hmm.
But the footage that he's getting is somehow mysteriously always destroyed. You
Ain't that
know,
some?
the tape is always getting stuck or ate up, or then he says it's the side trick curse, dude. And so I'm like, this ninja is actually sabotaging, you know, the ride. He's sabotaging the plot. But then there was always this recognition. Okay, I know what this ninja is doing. I know
Mm-hmm.
he's doing this on purpose. I know what this is. I also, not only do I have to, manage the rats, I also have to manage him,
Mm-hmm.
And so the story, okay, how will the Fat Mack prevail? It was like some Batman shit.
Yeah.
Will the Fat be able to overcome the side trick curse?
Mm-hmm.
You know, will he be able to check KBK? Will he? It was like some Brown Hornet shit.
Yeah.
Tune in, for next week's adventures and so forth. And that's what it was. And I'm like, okay, he has to navigate through all of this stuff. And so as this plot is going on, and I'm reading this stuff and I'm offering feedback on the message board.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started giving feedback based upon what I was seeing. I was seeing how, okay, he low key, this dude is low key sabotaging the shoots. He don't want any video, of him with someone else for some reason, but he's in the other videos for
Mm-hmm.
some reason. And then he's going behind. He said, "Look, stay away. Don't trick with her. I want her starving,
Yeah.
so she'll come back to the table and negotiate." Well, he going behind their
Ah!
back, tricking behind their back, and then
Oh
he
my God.
confesses after the fact and all this. And so I'm writing this on the message, but I'm responding to this because now what I'm starting to do, I'm starting to actually implement the stuff that I'm reading, and it's working.
Right.
It's working like gangbusters,
Mm.
you know. And I had, got into the bail bonds industry, so I had a proliferation of rats, at that time in Michigan. So it was on and popping at that time.
Okay.
I was like, I have been shown the light. The
Mm.
Fat Mack has shown me the way. And so I became a true believer because I was actually using what was there.
Yeah.
And it was working like gangbusters. And so I was putting these messages on the message board. I was putting this feedback on the message board. And so it was one of the scenes was with Allie.
Mm-hmm.
And you were saying, look, I can't sleep with this. I can't sleep on this female. She's way too agreeable. She's way too cooperative. I don't trust her.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, look, I make sure she sees my 9mm.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I make sure she sees my 9 millimeter. And from that, I said, okay, well, what's going on here? Okay, okay, authority, okay, uh, sex, violence, and little stuff began to crystallize based upon what I was seeing, and I was having these epiphanies and revelations based upon what was happening. And for the
Mm-hmm.
first time, it was clearing off. For the first time, I think I was probably about 27, 26, 27. It was all clearing up, and it was coming. I mean, the picture was clear as to what was going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had to look at that, caused me to look at politics differently, because I had to look at, okay, what was driving these women? What did they come from? So forth. I had this type of deep, uh, this type of deep uh, inspiration, you might say.
Okay.
What's driving all this? What is driving all this? And it's like, okay, what would make somebody get down like this just to keep a cell phone on? And then it was like, okay, you have to understand that their cell phone is their life's communication.
Mm-hmm.
That's the lifeblood. They operate off the cell phone.
Right.
I'm like, okay, why are they operating? You idiot, because they're poor. They're broke. They're on the system, you know.
Yeah.
And then everything, just it was like the Matrix. I was just awash, in what was happening. And I had to, form a new relationship as to how I saw them, how they saw me, and it just began to make sense. And then the thing was, this wasn't requiring a whole lot of money.
Okay.
This wasn't required. You wasn't spending a whole lot of money. I mean, it's pictures of this chick at Pizza Hut.
Mm-hmm.
And picture, and then it ain't like he's shopping, buying kids clothes. Like he buying kids clothes. What is this about?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he's shopping at Kmart. Oh,
Uh-huh.
oh. I was like, oh, this is wild. He's shopping at Kmart and he buying, pizza. And they're
Mm-hmm.
absolutely, they can't get enough of this. They're coming back. And I'm seeing the same rotation, this cast of characters coming back over and over again. I'm like, he getting all this off with Pizza Hut, McDonald's, and Kmart? And I'm up here spending $300 taking bras to Dave and Buster's.
Right.
This is not right. And
Mm.
so when I started giving feedback, I gave feedback on the message boards. What happened was you responded to one of the messages that I left,
Mm-hmm.
and from that response, we started, communicating and talking, and
Right.
then we had the conversation over the phone, and then after, because we conversed over the phone for like months, and then I got into a master's program here at a university here,
Mm-hmm.
and we hooked up. But that's what it was, and I'm like, this is insane. This is some insidiously evil, and I was intrigued by the evilness. I was intrigued, by, I mean, he just laying traps with, he in essence is laying traps with junk food, and with small amounts of money. I mean, he's laying traps with cell phone money. He's laying traps with pizza money. He's laying traps with. He ain't doing nothing but just picking them up and giving them a ride from one side of town to the other. And then I looked at, okay, goods and services. That's what that is.
Mm.
Goods and services. And I'm like, why are they so intrigued? Why are they so gone over this little stuff? And then it hit me. Nobody gives a damn about them. That's why.
Yeah.
And I
Oh.
said, they didn't have anybody else that gave a damn about it. I'm like, oh, that's why they shook over it. And
Mm.
then it was like, okay, the same token, while he's doing all this, then you see them running game, you see them trying to do little things, the remorse kicks in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they're running a little game, they're trying to hatch little capers and plots, but then they wind up, you see them 2 months later getting skeeted on after this so-called caper,
Oh man.
and like this is diabolical. This is sinister. And then it was the one that really, I said, okay. It was the one with Crybaby Nish, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he was like, she did or said something, and it was like it was one scene where she went shopping and she got some tennis shoes at Subway, and
Mm-hmm.
she was flexing like that, like she had,
Oh yeah,
like
yeah,
she had
yeah.
came up on a Bugatti or a Maserati.
Right.
She was flex. I'm like, this is tennis shoes and a Subway sandwich. And
Mm-hmm.
she flexing like she got a Bugatti or a Porsche, or like she came up on a house. Like it was like some Clay Thomas and Meg the Stallion stuff, and that's how she peacocking and popcorn and showboating. I'm like, but it's just a sandwich and tennis shoes,
It's
you know?
attention.
Yeah.
It's
And
attention,
so,
man.
and then I saw that, and then it said, okay, what she did, it was some transgression that she did. She
Mm-hmm.
got slick at the mouth and said something.
Right.
And he said, well, you on punishment. So
Yeah.
she's on punishment. And then next thing I know, I see her body scribbled up with, I love fat boys
Yeah.
across her chest.
Uh-huh.
And then there's an arrow going down her back pointing to her rectum saying, uh,
Do me
smash me
here.
here, do me here. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And so
yeah.
and then, I'm seeing her. Then another shot, the iconic one, was with that load was on her nose and the tears was in her eyes. And I'm
Oh
like,
my God.
oh my God, this is ill. And then when you actually see the video, and you see that scene, you see, that facial scene, and it's like, you off punishment.
Oh, it's
You
crazy.
know.
Well, good times. Good times,
And I'm
man.
like, this ride is real, you
Mm,
know.
mm, mm.
And so, of course, when I got here, we met, we hooked up, and we chopped it up, and then the rest, as they say, is history. And then from that point on, I started bumping into a lot of the girls that was on the site. I started bumping into them downtown
Right.
because I was at the jail. I started bumping into the first person I seen was Chatty.
Okay.
Chatty. Rest in peace, Chatty.
Right.
She was the first person I seen. And then the next person I seen was Sparkle.
Mm-hmm.
And I would call them by their name, and it would spook the hell out of them. Oh, how you doing? It would spook the hell out of them. And I took a
Yeah.
perverse pleasure in spooking them too, because they didn't know how I knew them, right?
Right.
And the next person I bumped into, I was getting my hair cut over there on the bird,
Okay.
and I bumped into Ice
Mm-hmm.
over there on the bird. And
Mm.
it's like I'm sitting here looking at the girl, who got the load in her face that was pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew her story before I had even met her.
Crazy.
You know, it was crazy. And so I subsequently wound up meeting her with you later on, and she was shook when she saw it was me. Well, she wasn't, shook like that, but she was just
Mm-hmm.
surprised. So, and then, I started seeing all of them, and I would call them by their names, and they would, I mean, that spooked them that I would call them by the names, you
Mm.
know, that
But you
they
call
were on
but
the
you
site.
call them by their government names, right?
I called them by their government names,
Yeah.
but I also knew their other names. I'd be like, you know what? I'm gonna call you Sparkle. Where
Okay.
did you get that name from? Where did you get that name from?
Mm-hmm.
And she was melting down because I was calling her by her. I knew her name,
Okay.
and the only reason I knew their government names because they all had cases.
Yeah.
They all had cases. I remember down there when I was in Dayton. I was down at Montgomery County Common Pleas Court, and uh, uh, KBK
Mm-hmm.
was down there in front of a judge, and he was reading off all the stuff she did. And I'm like, I'm knowing she going to jail. I'm
Uh-huh.
just knowing she's gonna go to jail, you know,
Mm.
because it's sentencing day, because I'll go to the court to try to advertise and hand out my cards, and generate business, and I'm like, I'm knowing she going to jail. I'm knowing she going to jail, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
just seeing this judge, put ninjas in the box, or go over there, sit in the box. You sit in the box. You sit in the box. Because when they sit in the box, They going, they're getting locked up.
Yeah.
Anytime he tell you to go over there and sit in that jury box, you're about to be incarcerated. And
Mm.
so I see a gang of dudes sitting in that box, and I see KBK come and he sent her home.